Joining me today is State Representative Chris Walsh of Framingham. Walsh is a state legislator in the 6th Middlesex District, representing a handful of precincts in Framingham since 2011 when he was first elected. He recently announced that he would run for mayor of Framingham and then had to shelve those plans to battle cancer. And he's joining me today so we can catch up on how he's doing and what he's doing. And he's looking pretty darn good. So thanks so much for being here today, Chris. It's really great to see you smiling, and to know that you're through your 4th round of treatment, which is pretty, you've made a lot of progress, pretty good. How are you feeling?
So, you know, cancer, it's a process. And I am through my 4th chemo session, which is basically a 3-week period. I have 1 week that I'm taking the chemo, 1 week that I'm not feeling very good, and 1 week where I can actually think and run around and do things. At the moment, I think the jury is out whether or not this the protocol that I'm doing is actually doing enough. So typical, we're sort of re-looking at it. We'll be re-looking at it, and you know, I have to say it's a spooky thing.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
It's there are no guarantees, and you know, keep on hoping that the tools that they have to deal with this are going to, you know, be there for when you need it. But I have to say the community has been unbelievably open and warm and supportive of me. I don't actually feel terrible most of the time, and I think that it's all in all, I would say I'm so lucky to be here in Massachusetts, where we have access to the health care. That's a big issue.
Yes,
but
it is.
Access to the health care in a community that is so cognizant and caring about these things, and so I'm one of the lucky ones, you know, in many respects, and I understand that, and I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, you know, you've been a real champion, I think, through this whole thing. You've been out with the people. You've been staying involved. Yeah. Everybody sees you and they cheer you on, and they only want the best for you and a speedy recovery, that's for sure. And I think at the beginning, when you were first diagnosed, you had no idea that it was a mild form of cancer.
It started off as a fairly, when I say mild form, I would have called it laconic.
Laconic?
Which is laconic, which basically
Did you make that up?
means, well, I mean, it's a word, but
yeah.
But it's a sort of you know, well, I'm not really dangerous. I'm just gonna. We thought that we could essentially treat it as a. This is the fact of life, you know, with some drugs and keep a lid on it for a good long while. Life doesn't often work out that way.
Right.
And in fact, it took a pretty nasty turn about 6 months ago, and we immediately went into sort of a second phase, which is to deal with the nasty side of it, which, for those of you that are doctors, called Richter's syndrome, and it is dangerous. But there are a lot of therapies that are coming on that are good, and I was in a study. Now, whether or not I'm meeting the places that the marks that they want me to meet is something that's right now on discussion. But as optimistic as doctors are, they have 3 or 4 other things that they're really excited about. So it looks like I may well be doing immunotherapy next, which is, instead of trying to kill the cancer with drugs, which means that you're killing all your white blood cells.
All the white blood cells.
You actually then flip and decide to beef up the white cells and see if they can't fight the cancer on their own.
Wow.
And so it's a kind of
building
new
up
world.
An army.
And I have to say that there's a certain kind of giving over to the process that you have to do. And I only hope that I can handle it in the kind of way that that people understand this is just part of the whole life, and really reflect, I think, the sort of the humor and optimism of where we live and how we live. And so it's you ask me 3 o'clock in the morning, it's a little more difficult. I'm a little darker about this whole thing, but right now I'm actually quite optimistic. So.
Well, you know, I think that when people go through something like this and they can stay positive and active and really, you know, approach it with a different perspective, that it's so helpful. You know, it helps you get through it. 3 o'clock in the morning is a tough time.
Tough time.
A really tough time. The nights are always worse when you have something and you think about it and it's dark and everything just swirls around in your head.
Yeah.
But you're keeping busy and you're with people and you're doing your work. You're at the State House. So in between the IV for, what'd you say, 3 weeks in the hospital?
So basically it's a 3-week cycle. The first week I basically am in a continuous 24/7 IV with chemo.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stop. And then the second week I'm out trying to, you know, desperately just recover, and that somewhere about midweek I start to feel a little bit better, kind of get over it. And then the third week my brain actually starts functioning, right. And I can drive and I can get places and meet people. And so I get a little frantic and, you know, running around trying to squeeze it all, you know,
right,
3
right.
weeks into
There's so much you want to do,
week.
Right.
But it's working. To date, it's working, and I've been able to get to the State House for some what I considered important votes. The marijuana bill, certainly the budget, which was, I thought, is always an important vote.
You posted a great picture of yourself when you were there voting on the budget.
Yes, well, you know, I went in and a person's white blood count, you know, usually runs between 3 something and 5 something, and mine had dropped to 0.01, and I basically had no white blood cells, and I'm told to stay away from crowds. So when I go into a crowd like that, I do 2 things. One is I try not to shake anybody's hand, which is almost impossible in the State House, or hug, or whatnot. But I wore a mask, and it just reminded me so much of looking at the Tokyo subway.
Yeah.
You know, but
you were there for the vote.
I was there for the vote.
All.
And I want people to know that I'm still interested. Being sick does not mean that, you know, having one of these things, it doesn't mean that you aren't involved in all of the same things and have the same things otherwise. And so, and I know that anybody that's gone through the process understands that. You know, they're still involved in all of these things. Whether or not you have the stamina sometimes, and this came down to the mayor's race. I looked at the timing of running for mayor, and it did not match up with the timing.
Yeah, and it seemed
all.
it seemed like your decision from yes, I'm going to run to no, I'm not going to run, there was a very short window.
There was a biopsy in between.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. And the biopsy basically said it's gone from this laconic to this rather aggressive. And what was too bad was, well, actually it was sort of amusing in a way. State House News had basically come to me and said, so you're running or not? And I said, look, it would take a nuclear war or an asteroid to keep me from running. You know, I'm not going to say I'm running yet because, you know, it's a timing thing, but I am really excited about what this race could mean. And I'm really excited about being in it. And then literally, you know, a couple days later, you know, I get the news of the biopsy and I sit down with the doctors and they lay out the plan of attack, and it requires a bone marrow transplant in September.
Oh my God.
You know?
Yes.
And
the preliminary is September 26th and the
right,
general is
and
November 7th.
I kind of look at this and basically said, it's not happening. So I had to go back and say, oh, there was a third thing. nuclear war, asteroid, or if this thing, turns on me. And it just was one of those, there's no way that you can foresee these things. And I had a funny little talk with the speaker about this, because he said, well, Chris, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm dying. And he gets sort of this, like, because no one ever says that.
Right.
And I said, but in all truth, we all are.
Yeah.
And it's just that there's a little definition around mine that you don't have right now.
Yeah.
But, you could have that stroke, heart attack, car accident, and whatnot. So there's a certain directness to having to think about this that we typically don't do, because you'd be crazy if you thought about it all day long. You'd be nuts. So, but it has been an education, and it certainly has been an education when it comes to healthcare. And I have to tell you that I was there to start with, but I'm even stronger now. This country needs to go to a single payer. We can have some options in there, but it would need to be a strong single payer option in terms of what healthcare is.
Well, you talk about that, and Bernie Sanders talked about that. A lot of people have talked about that on the campaign trail. But I don't know if people really understand how they would benefit or what it really means to be a single payer.
Well, essentially, Medicare is a single payer. You basically pay in over time, and you have health insurance that's basically guaranteed by the government. And so
it doesn't seem like our government is going anywhere close to a single payer system. It's almost as far away from that right now in the current federal administration as you could possibly go.
But it comes down to it. You cannot ask people to become destitute because they get a cancer or they have a stroke. You can't ask someone to sell all of their worldly goods just to pay the amazing amount of money that the drugs cost. And believe me, I've seen the bills for the drugs, and it's a stunning number. And there's
hundreds of thousands. I mean, you could
hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm well into the millions of dollars. I'm not sure that everybody would feel that it's worth it at the moment for me, but be it as it may, the idea that, as some people have said, that it's, I don't know, God's will or something you've done is ludicrous. This is something that happens to people. They have no control over it, and to essentially deny them either a chance to live and go on, or any wherewithal to live is crazy.
I think it's a recipe for chaos in the world and in our country, and I just see that we're all human. We all have that in common. We're all human, and we all have needs. And
when you think about it, think about the fact that at the moment we are putting this on employers. Well, what if the employers did not have to worry about health insurance? What if that side just disappeared? That would be a huge boon to our economy, just in the energy and money that goes in to employers having to carry all of this stuff and it would unshackle so many things.
Right, but then something else has to get cut in order to pay for it in the federal government.
Well, so here's the question. Remember that it's all about pool size. And the pool size is, so I'm expensive at the moment, but I wasn't always expensive. There are a lot of people out there who are not expensive at all.
Right. I mean, I think I had my best health insurance when I was in my 20s.
Right.
When I never needed a thing.
But so essentially paying whatever they need to pay, essentially then buys the health insurance, if you will, for people like me.
Right.
And what I paid before would have easily paid for what I'm doing now. So the pool, if it's large enough, and spread out enough really is not difficult. And I think a good case can be made that things like Medicaid, Medicare are actually cheaper than going into the open market and letting the market dictate what you get. We've seen what the market does.
Mm-hmm.
And the market is going to charge you what the market will bear.
Right.
And unless you start doing other things, then it's going to charge you what the market bear. So anyway, but it's made me very sensitive to that, and in terms of what it means to feel as if someone has your back. That if you get sick, someone has your back. And to me, it's not good enough.
Must be quite different than the way John McCain felt yesterday.
Well, I'm a little irritated.
Yeah, a little irritated. Is probably quite an understatement. I mean, he literally just had taxpayer-funded surgery and then came in and voted against. And
remember, I grew up in a military family, a long-time military family, as he did. And I will always tell you that a person can have personal courage, and then they also have to have what I call a moral courage in terms of that, which is they have to personally be able to stand up, which I believe he really can. The question is whether or not, looking at it, he has that empathetic sense of, you know what, knowing that I have the health care has made my life livable. If I didn't have it and I had to sell my family's home and ask my wife to move into a trailer camp or whatnot to get this paid for or go bankrupt, he should be able to extrapolate that and say, this is something that if I can give to everybody, if I can.
There's obviously a miss there. I mean, it's not being extrapolated.
Anyway.
But this is something that I would imagine there's a new passion for, and that hopefully that passion you'll be able to play that out for us after your recovery.
Yep, I hope so.
Yeah. You're working on so many things that you're passionate about, and you always are working on so many things that you're passionate about. Recently, you were able to bring Framingham into the court coverage system in the housing courts, which it had never had access to.
So I'm gonna put a little detail on that, because I carried for several terms now, several sessions now, a bill to expand the housing court beyond essentially 2/3 of Massachusetts has access to a housing court, and 1/3 did not.
Yeah.
And we happen to be in the 1/3
But how the heck did that ever happen, where 1/3 didn't have it and 2/3 did? Why was that?
So essentially, it's an accident of how it grew and who was in charge at the time and whether or not they liked the idea or didn't like the idea.
So there's this housing court that serves a population of people in Massachusetts on housing-related issues.
Housing and construction.
And construction.
Right.
And gives them, lawyer of the day access to things like that. And Framingham did not have access to that, but 2/3 of the state did.
Right.
So how long did it take you to?
To me, this is what you call a problem with equal access to justice.
Sure.
That justice, among other things, are one of those things that if one person has access to it, everybody should have access. We don't live in a bifurcated society where if you went to an Ivy League school that you have one kind of justice. I mean, in real terms, maybe there are things that happen, but the law should be blind and should say, if one person has access to it, the other person should have access to it. And this just seemed to be a problem. Now, so I was saying that I carried this bill and we were working very hard to move it through the process. We got very close last time. We didn't get it over the goal line. Worked with the Massachusetts Law Foundation, Massachusetts MLRI Institute, Law Reform Institute, and they did fabulous work. The court systems were very interested in expanding it. But it didn't seem like we were getting it over the goal line. In this budget, the language got put in the budget as an outside section, which means it wasn't dealing with money, but it was expanded to the Commonwealth. And our great Senator Karen Spilka went to bat as chair of Ways and Means in the Senate for it, and she pulled it over the line. And I mean, she deserves a lot of credit for it. It would have taken us another few sessions to get it over the line in the way that it did, and she made it happen. So, so I'm really excited.
To all of you, thank you so much for all of those efforts as a legislative delegation to make that happen. I guess the thing that's so hard to understand from people who outside of that system is why would something that seems to be so just so poorly distributed and so unfair, why would it take so long to fix it?
So when people talk to me about legislation, one of the things that they often said, Chris, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And I always say to them, those words are the death knell. No-brainer is a death knell. Yeah. Because people actually do see things radically differently. Mm-hmm. And to try to get someone, if you're unable to go meet someone in where they're thinking, i.e. someone who's against it, and say, I'm going to listen to you, actively listen to you and understand what your problem is. If you basically say this is a no-brainer, you've lost the argument.
Yeah.
You can't have that discussion. So it requires an immense amount of flexibility in saying, deep breath, this seems like a no-brainer to me, but I am going to really listen to what you have to say and what your issues are, and let's see if we can find common ground.
Has that ever totally changed your mind on an issue? Because obviously you're passionate about some issues and people might come to you and they'll be very passionate on the other side. Has it ever, how does that?
Has it changed? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I have. And it's interesting because the legislative process is a process. I tell people, you vote on things, but what's really interesting is do you get an opportunity to have input along the way? Mm-hmm. And are you part of that conversation about what the total is? I'm going to use an example. So the marijuana law.
Right.
So we had a referendum. It went through. A lot of people felt, that's it. We should just do it that way. And I know that the House in particular was very interested in making sure that other things happened, that some people were protected, that children with edibles were protected, that there was enough money to do some of the things that we felt we needed to do to offset those. In particular, weirdly enough, I focused on industrial hemp, which is the non-psychotropic part of marijuana, which is a commercial crop. And I looked at, in Framingham, that we have several farms and open spaces that struggle. They struggle. They're in a part of the Commonwealth that land values are very, very high. It's very hard for them to stay being farmers. They need all the help in terms of what they can grow and what they can't grow, and they need a crop that's, that's easy.
Right, so you thought commercial hemp might have been an opportunity for them.
Commercial hemp. So we actually wrote language for commercial hemp, and then that went into the omnibus marijuana bill, pretty much just as it was, just as we wrote it, which I was thrilled at. And the idea was to actually separate industrial hemp away from marijuana so that it was actually handled as a commercial crop through the Department of Agriculture, so that it all was kind of easy for our farmers to get into it and do it.
But what you're going to tell me is that didn't make it.
No, it did make it.
It did make it? Oh.
But the problem, of course, is then I'm voting to push through industrial hemp. The people who did or didn't like marijuana were very intense about these details on the marijuana. Is it a 12% excise tax? Is it a 10%? Is it a 3% excise tax? And I needed to make sure that I shepherded my part through, and that went to help the people that I knew I could help right in front of me. And that a lot of the other things of the marijuana and whatnot would sort themselves out through this process, if not exactly right now, over a little bit of time. But I had to really basically say, and I had this conversation with a friend of mine. I'm not sure if he thinks he's a friend of mine, but he's a friend of mine. And say, it's important for Framingham and for those farms and for the quality of life in Framingham in terms of how land use is, that we get this. And so I could subsume a number of, I could take it sort of easy on a couple of those things of whether or not it's 10% or 12%. To me, it was like, let's make sure we get this piece in there that will help the people in Framingham retain some of that quality.
So that's how it ended up at 20%, is what you're saying.
Well, so the 20%, you know, the House started at 28. And
because so many people had other things that they wanted in there.
Well, no, so that it started at 28. And if you think about it, it was, if I do the numbers right, and remind me if I don't, that there's the regular tax, which is 6.25%. There's the local option tax, which was 5%, and then I think it was, so it's 1675 was the excise
20,
tax.
it ends up at 20, right? Yeah.
And so, you know, you basically, you look at it in these various pieces and you say, that's how we got it, that number. And the Senate had a different number, and it was a brutal negotiation in terms of that, in terms of where that was going to be fair, because you wanted to essentially destroy the black market by having it low enough, and yet you had things that you had to set up whole systems for people to whole systems for people to have some controls, and so and money to help people get over their addictions and all sorts of things in there that were important in the long run, in the overall. But my point here is the complicated nature of voting for something because you know there's a piece of it that right now is going to help, you know, those farmers all across the Commonwealth keep their family farms and get their kids into the farming. You know, that's a really important piece to that, and people tend to focus on other things that they're interested in. It's a funny business.
Well, I think that's really important because that ties right into the insatiable appetite to preserve our open space and to save farms.
Yeah.
And there are very few ways really that have been proven to work to do that in Massachusetts, and ways that we're struggling to find to do that. And this is what you're saying, it might be one of those ways.
It's one of those ways. And honestly, some of the trouble in terms of open space, there are places where open space, there's plenty of open space.
Is there a tax credit for growing commercial hemp, or is it just the profit from growing the commercial?
It'd be the profit. It's a billion-dollar industry. You know, I don't.
So do you think there's local interest
Canada.
in the Framingham farms in that?
Absolutely.
And how long do they have to wait before they get started? I mean, is that something that?
So in talking to Department of Agriculture, and I did this week, I had some farmers here who were saying, we'll wait and we won't put our wheat in case we get this. And I talked to Department of Agriculture. They said, it's not going to happen this year. It'll happen next year. So they've gone and they've started to plant their wheat and whatnot. But some of the things that were problematic is that people didn't understand the huge difference between industrial hemp and marijuana. In fact, industrial hemp, anybody that's growing marijuana doesn't want industrial hemp anywhere near their plants because it is so much weedier than the marijuana that it'll essentially contaminate the crop and ruin the crop. So, you know,
what kind of companies buy the industrial hemp?
Well, I mean, it's used in everything from concrete in building houses to paper to fabrics to there are hundreds and hundreds of uses, and they're growing every day in terms of what they're using.
Is it a seasonal crop?
So actually, what's great is that you can actually go 3 crops in 1 year in a New England season.
3 harvests?
3 harvests It is a wonderful carbon sink plant. It actually takes carbon out of the air. It's really good that way. And it has all of these really great uses. So it was the premier crop in the United States until it was outlawed in the whole reefer madness days.
Mm-hmm. Is there going to be a glut now? Because is there going to be a glut now?
Oh, I know. George Washington was a hemp farmer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, they made ropes out of it. They made fabrics out of it. They made all of these things. Most people, it was one of America's big crops for a long time. But then it got mixed up with the issue of marijuana and psychotropic drugs. And one of our big challenges was always to say it needs to be split.
Yeah.
You need not to think hemp. You know, there's so many great folk songs in the back, you know, in the years past about, you know, someone smoking the ropes on the Titanic, you know, and whatnot, which is really just not true. You would have to smoke 5 acres of industrial hemp to feel a slight buzz.
I got that message.
So anyway.
Okay. So that's good. That's very promising. Of course, there's.
So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
I am so excited about the housing court. As an architect, I have to tell you, this is something that we have needed, that has been a problem.
What's it going to do? What is it going to solve that has been
so first of all,
not been addressed for all this time?
So first of all, the housing court basically has things built into it. It's got mediation built into it.
Yeah.
So you have a tenant, and you have a landlord, and most of the time the landlords are very, very small operations. They're not big operations.
Yeah.
And the issues really come in interpersonal relationships in terms of the landlord and the tenant. The tenant feels something's wrong. The landlord feels the tenant is, you know, just, you know, not paying him. He's got his mortgage that he needs to make. And the whole thing spins way out of control, particularly if they happen to be related. And so this has a mediation package built right into it. Let's sit down and see if we can't resolve it. We are interested in tenant preservation, as landlords should be. They don't want to have their units empty, and the tenants don't want to be homeless. So everybody has a vested interest in making it work. So this is built to make it work. It has
help resolve the issues between tenants and landlords.
So if you go to a housing court, it's got a table with lawyers who help landlords fill out paperwork, and then across the hall, it's got a table with lawyers who help tenants.
So what will this be, part of the Middlesex District Court that's here in Framingham, or where will it actually be physically?
We're hoping that one of the early rollouts is here in terms of it.
A new location or within?
It is kind of up to the courts in terms of how they work that, but I would love to see it. Framingham is a big community with a lot of urban issues, and those urban issues come right down to tenant issues and landlord issues and construction issues.
How's it going to be staffed, and is the
service
going to meet the needs of the community? I mean, it is probably going to be inundated very quickly.
So right now, of course, all of that's going to district court, civil court, and it needs now to have its own judge and some staffing, and this is up to the courts to organize. So we've put some money. We didn't get as much money from the governor as we'd hoped. We'd put aside $1 million, and I think he's cut it down to $750. But it's money for them to start the organizational process. So, and
you think it'll be sustained?
Oh, it'll be sustained.
Okay.
This is a moneymaker in the end. This will save us. This will save so much money in terms of when you think about the cost of a family going homeless and what the state has got to help them with. It's a stunning amount of money.
Has anybody been able to quantify that? Was that part of the process in getting this through? Was the whole quantification
so
of
this is actually pretty well quantified in places, and I don't have the numbers.
No,
but it is, and you're constantly trying to think of how do we do this better? How do we keep people either in their homes, in their...
Is there someone who monitors this to see how it's performing and benchmarks it?
The courts, in terms of the court system, there definitely is.
Yeah.
In terms of how it works.
But I mean, in terms of what you're talking about in the savings overall, you know, is there really a way to measure that?
There are ways to measure it. Now,
with a direct correlation?
Well, you're more of a numbers person than I am in terms of that. But I would say that there is one of the big frustrations in pretty much anything you do in the state is that you realize that if you can spend some money up front and take care of problems before they go critical, you actually save a lot of money.
Well, this is true. I mean, look at the issues that we have, you know, around prevention with if we had more mental health services.
That's right.
And what it would prevent.
And so you're constantly saying, this will save money, but then you have to have the money to save the money.
Yeah.
And so it's this sort of kind of cyclic thing where, you know, you're cutting money out that you know is going to actually save you money, but you have to, you know, that quantification of what it saves is kind of
very true. Very true.
And so it's a consistent problem that we're dealing with. The numbers are out there. Housing court is going to keep people housed. It's going to make landlords, you know, be able to deal with it better. It's going to.
Well, you know, landlords have not really had very strong protections in Massachusetts. It's known as a state where the tenant really rules, don't you think?
I think in the past that's probably been true.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that landlords come in a number of different varieties.
No, very, very, very true.
And there's some really, really big landlords that are really well protected.
Very, yeah.
The landlords that kind of take it on the chin are the 1 and 2 offs.
Right, that's kind of what I was thinking
about. And so we ran this scenario because I've been running a group, a discussion group, if you will, on various issues for these last 4 or 5 years. And we've been talking through these issues. And one of the problems you have is that landlords, particularly if, let's say there's a landlord owns, you know, 3 units and he rents to a nephew. Well, if the nephew stops paying because he's lost his job or this or whatnot, the landlord may say, his uncle may say, that's okay, pay me next time. Well, next time may come and he doesn't get payment. And he says, well, you know, Eddie, you have to pay me.
Right.
By the time he actually starts to take action, it's well down. He's really in trouble now. He's more worried about paying his mortgage, right, and the heat bill than he is anything else at this point. And so he gets really kind of frantic. He, she, they get kind of frantic because now they're behind the 8 ball. So the tenant is not paying the landlord's not paying the mortgage, the landlord could possibly lose the property because of this thing. So we're really looking to cut through the red tape and say, let's get you guys in front of a mediator right away. First thing, right in front of a mediator. Let's see if we can't solve this. Let's
and is that a free service, or do they pay for that?
It's part of the whole. I think there's a fee to going to housing court that whoever files done, but it's part of the service. And so it gets to the root of the matter quickly. And so we're real excited. We think it will. Good. And beyond the pure justice of having that equal access to justice, where if one person has it, everybody has it. It's not different justices for different people. Really excited about that one. So,
are you still also working? I know for quite some time you were working on the Dover Amendment. Are you still doing any work on that?
So, ostensibly, yes. And I will say that it is.
And this is for those who are watching who don't really know the Dover Amendment. I mean, it's the law really allows religious and educational institutions to locate in a community, not pay taxes, not necessarily have to work within all the existing zoning bylaws. They have exceptions.
They have sort of truncated review process.
Yeah.
And it is one of the things that if you live in a neighborhood and there's a piece of open space next to you and someone decides they're going to build a mega church or they're going to build whatever, that it is really divisive.
I mean, it has basically, in the days when it was first enacted, it was really serving a purpose because communities didn't want certain types of educational institutions or et cetera in the communities, and it allowed them to come in even where they may not have been welcomed.
Yeah, so the welcoming part is always this kind of tricky business.
It's the tricky business.
And one of the things you can say, if someone like buys a piece of land, you know, they have property rights to that land, and they can, you know, do certain things. The question is,
it gets exploited quite a bit. I mean,
it does.
When a university that has a multi-million-dollar endowment starts taking
this
properties
is where,
and taking them off the tax rolls and expanding and taking over community.
This is where the real trouble is the big universities, big hospitals, whatnot, and big
religious
churches.
institutions, yes.
Basically think it's a
Do you think it'll ever get better? Because right now, you know, it's so lenient.
So what I really wanted to get to, it really comes down to a land use issue more than anything else. And the question really in my mind is, what are we trying to achieve in the end? Well, we would like to keep a community character. And I don't mean lily white or this or that. What I mean is that there is a mix, that there's some farmland, particularly in a place like Framingham, some farmland, there's some, you know, housing stock, there's some urban areas, and you really want to have that mix that works. So the question is if you have someone who can basically just say, hey, this is what we're going to do and it's going to happen and you don't have a choice, it creates a divisiveness in the community that can be wild.
Totally.
So you really can look at it two different ways. Do you actually say to someone, you know, you've bought this piece of land, but you can't use it? Or do you basically say, one of the things that we really need to do is we need to get serious, and I mean really, really serious about preserving open space. We need to look at that community and say, where do we want open space? Where do we want, you know, where do these things, how do you keep that mix? Because open space is wildly valuable.
But how does that tie in with the Doberman?
Well, so if you take a look at the places in Framingham where people will take a big open space and do a project, and Framingham is probably not the best community to talk about it because, in fact, we are above. Well, anyway. But what I'm saying is that one of the things you want to do is you want to move that, you want to protect open space and keep that community character. And if that's protected, then you're not, if it's really protected, you're not going to have a project, you know, a tower come in or a housing tower.
Well, when you say protected.
Open space.
Yeah, but the Dover Amendment, I mean, you basically, somebody could buy a property and build something under the Dover Amendment and not pay taxes.
That's true. So you have to basically look at the community and say, where do we want, you know, where do we want density? Where do we, so let's take, for example, if you go into any urban environment, you have a mix of nonprofits, profits, restaurants, hospitals. No one notices because there's there's density and there's stuff happening.
Right. But there's a preemption that can happen under Dover. How do you prevent the preemption? Well, that's the thing I'm wondering
if
about.
you go out into an open field and you say, so now all of a sudden we're going to build the Mormon church,
right.
you know, here, you know, people get very upset because it completely changes the character of that area. So if you can actually move that and protect that as fields, like some community have through buying it outright on the CPA, like Lincoln, Lexington, you know, they
right. But if the town or the city can't afford to buy all that open space, then
so we're getting to the point. Now I'm going to talk about transfer development rights.
Oh, okay. But I still don't understand how the Dover.
So this is how you deal with that. Is you look at it and you say, we need to actually protect open space, and if open space is really protected, you can't come in with if that land isn't for sale because it is protected as a farm,
right?
Then
I understand that
it has a different community value as open space.
But we have like the RCS project on Edmonds Road right now.
That's right.
Okay, and that was a Dover Amendment project.
But that piece of property, when it came up, I don't know, 20 years ago as Archstone, it was Archstone Properties, and the neighborhood got all together and sort of worked at beating it back. immediately after they withdrew Archstone, I went to a bunch of neighbors and they said, now is the time to do a deal. Because one of the things that I can tell you is if this project didn't happen today, it will happen sometime of some project.
So what kind of deal were you looking at?
I just wanted the community to go for the Community Preservation Act and buy the open space, or I wanted them to band together and say, let's put a smaller project in there that we can approve that will essentially use it.
Is the state going to still support the CPA? Because now that it's been in place for years and Boston's now a part of it, there's less matching funds for all the other communities that enter.
We unfortunately in Framingham, I think, stepped away from a really good deal way back when with the CPA. That had we put the CPA in. So
you're saying it's too late?
I don't think it's too late. I don't think it's ever too late to do those things, but it's not as good as a deal as it would have been.
Yeah, because the matching has gone down. There's less funds, right?
So I think when you look at this and you think, it's not so much, what you really want to do is you want to look at it and try to move it away from an us and them kind of issue in the Dover. And you really want to say, what kind of character are we going for, and solve the problem there.
I understand what you're saying with that, but from a legislative point of view, can't Dover be updated so that it's not?
I have been told point blank, because believe me, I filed a number of different things in order to both 40B and Dover to modify them, to make it just a little easier on the community, and I was told point blank, it's not going to happen.
Okay.
There is.
It's too political.
It's so political, and you have urban areas who think in the suburbs we're a bunch of weenies, and you have the rural areas who are dying for any sort of anybody to come out there at all, and we're sort of stuck in the middle, kind of taking the brunt where we have these issues. So my view is, let's solve the problem before it's a problem.
I see what you're saying.
And let's
look at some workarounds. You're looking at workarounds.
I think you have to.
Yeah, because it's not going anywhere. You've been told point blank that was not going anywhere. So you have to look at workarounds. That's all there is to it.
And so,
I get that. Okay.
So Dover is and 40B are tricky bits of business.
Yeah.
That I know people don't like.
40B is not as big an issue for Framingham because of the saturation. We've reached the threshold. We're past the threshold of affordable housing.
But even then, does a community have to hit that threshold to?
Good question.
There's so many things that are funny little sort of bylines. I was thinking about a piece of legislation I was trying to explain to someone, one of my bills, that if you have a building that there's a landlord, he owns a commercial building, and let's say there's a building in a wealthy community and the same building exists in a non-wealthy community. So if you want to work on that building and upgrade it, you have to always pay attention to 1/3 the assessed value of that building, because that will trigger 100% code compliance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. We've seen that in efforts to try to upgrade municipal buildings, even with our own village hall.
But it's obvious that a wealthy community can spend more money to upgrade that building than a poor community, which makes no sense, because you actually want the poor community to put money into their buildings.
Right.
And so those are the things that I think you have to look at in law and try to untangle and figure out how to even them out over time.
You can keep doing that for us, right?
I love doing that.
I know you do, and you're making progress. That's a good. But let's, and especially when you talk about the buildings, that whole architect in you comes out. That's for sure. I'm going to switch the topic though for a minute quickly. I know Governor Baker. Get back a little bit to healthcare. Governor Baker's healthcare protections that he's putting in place. What do you think they'll work?
Well, that's a big question. Do I think their work?
I mean, he's taking a step, a bold step, I think, for a Republican governor.
Well, actually, I think a case could be made to say that he's really lessening some of the protections that are in place. everybody knows that cost escalation is one of the big problems. And so he's looking at it, I think, very much from a financial point of view, is we have to do something, right? And then you have people who look at it and say, but who are you throwing off? Who's not getting the services? Who's being cut back?
Yeah, how does it actually work? Like,
well, so they're going through Ways and Means right now, and the House, I think, just voted to basically say we're not going to follow the governor's protection. That happened, I think, yesterday.
All right.
So, but it's one of those things that, again, if in fact we don't move to something that makes more sense and solves the problem before it becomes a problem, that we are going to continually spin. I mean, you can parse this and cut it up and say, well, we're going to take a little bit from here and whatnot. But the real question is, how do you really move the dial in terms of where the big money goes into insurance companies and whatnot? And that's where I think the single payer will really, really shine.
Okay.
So
now Framingham is on the verge of becoming a city.
Yeah.
After 317 years of being a town. And some people have hopes that being a city means that there'll be more resources being made available to Framingham. Some people think that that's a misperception. What do you think?
Well, I think in outright resources, you have cities like Boston, which are these sort of central things, Boston, Worcester, New England's two big cities, that have an ability to pull in a lot of resources. You have other cities that the state has gone out of its way, cities and towns, quite honestly, most of them are towns, gone out of its way to try to help because they realize that they have urban issues.
Framingham certainly has urban issues.
Framingham it does have urban issues. And the question really is, when you get into this nomenclature and you call a gateway cities or a gateway community, that there are resources that are available to those communities that aren't necessarily available to others. I'm not saying that Framingham should be one, but Framingham is almost unique in the Commonwealth in, first, the wide range of wealthy people living on Carter Drive and around, and the housing projects around Beaver Avenue and everything in between, with urban issues and immigration issues. And it's one of these communities that you could really say, we have it all, both bad and good, we have it all. So the question really is, are there more just outright resources? Well, there could be. But I'm not really sure that that's the point in terms of city or not city.
What is the point then?
So I really think the point is whether or not, in my view, decisions can be made in the milieu of the sequence of the timing that I believe a modern community has got to make them. And I know that you and I were actually on different sides of this issue.
But it's done. It's done. And we're moving forward.
And we're moving forward.
And so I'm just curious, the decision-making process and the sequence of the decision-making process is what you're saying.
Yeah. And so I think there are really twofold things. One, which is the decision-making process within the town. Whether or not you can actually sort of have a group of people who represent other people say, okay, so we are going to make the decision. We meet weekly or whatever, and we'll track this decision down. And then the second one is how the state then looks back at a community. And I think this is one that I never understood till I was at the State House, which is the governor actually does say, get the mayors together. And if you're not at the table, if you're not at the table when the governor says, get the mayors together, who's it, I want to talk to the people in charge, that I think it's a problem. And I've seen it play out in communities where the chair of the Board of Selectmen ought to be called, but they're not.
You would think then that the cities would be doing so much better than the towns.
Well, You know,
Are
cities
they?
also have many other problems in terms of the as I say, they're gateway cities that have huge urban problems without the resources that Framingham has. So Framingham and Metro West area is really one of the single best economic engines in the Commonwealth. I mean, we're huge, and in terms of what's out here, but it's a mix between wildly wealthy and educated people and,
Well, you
and
know,
people who are not.
Former President Clinton, when he came here, said he came here because Framingham looked like America.
And it really does, and it has
it's a
everything
microcosm.
But you have cities like, you know, the Lowells and the old industrial cities that have a certain certain texture to it that's difficult, and then you have places like Weston, and we're really somewhere in between.
So question for you, when are you up for re-election?
18 next year.
Next year, okay. So obviously, you're going to tell us now that you're going to run?
I am definitely going to run.
Okay, good.
I won't do the asteroid thing, but I'm definitely going to run.
Good.
I have to say, you know, one of the things that looking at the mayor's position that was always hard was that I love what I do. I love talking to people. I love hearing what the issues are and digging into those issues. I have a great staff, and it's complicated, and it's frustrating, and how else are you going to really spend your time that you can really dig into some of these issues?
Stay strong, get well, and run that campaign.
Thanks, Audrey.
Okay.
Really great.
You know, Representative Chris Walsh has an office right here in Framingham at 9 Vernon Street. He holds office hours regularly and invites residents to come in and talk about issues. So he's there for you if you'd like to tap into that. And as a Framingham resident, I want to thank him so much for his service, which has continued in spite of his illness. And I know we all wish him a speedy and thorough recovery. So thanks for tuning in to the Audrey Hall Show, where you'll always learn something new.